Good morning. I'd like to call to order the Delaware County Board of Elections Board meeting for June 1st, 2023. Can we all please stand to say the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Right, it's always nice in an election when we get to this point where we're here to certify. Mr. Allen, would you like to present the agenda, please?
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. The agenda is fairly straightforward with public comment first, Director of Elections report, which will cover also some return board business, and then the certification of the results themselves, including the 2 special elections that were conducted in tandem with this month's primary election. And lastly, resolution regarding precinct consolidations where we have micro precincts and the pursuit of an RFP for electronic poll books.
Excellent. So we'll begin with public comment. Is there anybody who would like to make public comment, recognizing that you need to say your name, your address, and you have 3 minutes? Ms. Schwartz.
Good morning, Board
Good
of
morning.
Elections. My name is Joy Schwartz. I live at 514 Lombardy Road. I'm also a candidate for County Council. On May 16th, during the primary election, I had authorized representatives representing me at the Counting Center at the Wharf who requested that during that day, couple times, that they be permitted to inspect some public records, namely the envelopes from which mail-in ballots have been extracted. They were denied that request. That request was in accordance with Act 77, and these are clearly public records. For the last about couple weeks, I've been renewing that request for the counting of those and examination of the envelopes. Those envelopes have been separated from the ballots, so there's no indication of how those particular people voted. But this is my right, according to Act 77, to inspect and to count, if I wish, all of the mail-in ballot envelopes. Basically, I did not get an affirmative response. I don't understand the recalcitrance of the county in granting me this request. Basically, both GOP Chair Frank Agavino and minority election board member Mr. John McBlain have both affirmed that I have the right to examine these materials and that they are public records. And so therefore, yesterday, I filed an emergency petition to count and to examine the expended mail-in ballot envelopes. And since the county has not been forthcoming, I have also requested, as part of this emergency petition, the image files from the Blue Crest sorter. This is also a record to which I'm entitled. So I'm just informing you that this morning, and thank you very much.
Ms. Schwartz, it's interesting, right? Because I don't know if it's ironic in the sense of Alanis Morissette's song, but we've had so many debates over chain of custody, and you and others coming forward to say, you know, I'm commenting now, it's my turn to comment. You know, somebody touched a ballot or this, that, things that we have found not to be true, and now here it is that you've asked to go sorting through some of the materials in an uncertified election. We're here to certify it. We followed the law. We follow the Open Records Act. You've been given, I think, sound counsel by our solicitor and Mr. Allen as to what is permissible and what is not. But it's just interesting to me that at this time that you of all people would be asking to touch some of the election materials. I understand you say it's limited, it's just the envelopes. But at a time when we have an uncertified election, it seems to me just the opposite of what you've been trying to advocate for before. And so it's my turn, right? And so anyway, it's disappointing, but I think you've been given sound counsel. I have nothing is more important to us than transparent elections, but we also have to get them right. We have to follow the law, and we can't have the not permissible under the law interference with that activity, because we wouldn't be doing our duties. It's my belief. So I don't know if anybody else wants to comment on what was said. You may.
I do have a comment, Madam Chair, and I also find it ironic, actually, your comments. I'm not sure whether you're aware of specifically what the request was for, but the request here was to examine the outside envelopes that were separated from the mail-in ballots that are just stored in tubs. And you know, it's been exasperating for me over these last couple of weeks. Again, I'm not the advocate for Ms. Schwartz on this, but you know, it seems to me that some, at least, our election officials are making decisions based on who the requester is rather than what is being requested. It's clear under the law that all the papers of the board are open for public inspection during normal business hours, as long as the board or its employees are not using those papers at the time. Here, the envelopes that were requested to be viewed were not being used during the canvass process, have no relevance. They've been separated from the ballots. They have no relevance to the certification of the election at this point in time. And I have seen, at least, because unfortunately I've been, you know, part of this is that there's been different reasons given for it. So the idea that this would somehow break the chain of custody or interfere with the certification is just absolutely untrue. And if this board is going to have, if you know, we conduct the most transparent elections in Pennsylvania, is going to be anything more than a slogan, it's important to allow the public to view the records. And I don't understand, other than perhaps who the requester is, why it is that she has not been allowed to view these records at this point in time. The election code states that the records are available for public inspection during normal business hours. I understand that there's a practicality to that, depending on the volume of records, depending on what the records are, you know, it should be made. I've talked to Mr. Parks. There's the idea of, well, we should treat it perhaps as though in the time frame that you can be treated for an open records request under the right to know law. Well, if that's the case, the 5 days are more than gone. They're more than gone. And there's no good reason that I've heard so far why Ms. Schwartz or anybody else, doesn't matter who the requester is, doesn't matter what the motivation is, which appears to be part of the consideration here, this board and our employees are just simply in the wrong on this one. That's my comment.
Mr. McLean, I mean, there's a difference between saying that they're in the wrong and you disagree. And I think there are sound reasons that have been presented to Ms. Schwartz and to you by both Mr. Allen and Mr. Parks. And I'll give them an opportunity if they want to reiterate them, some of which were under counsel advice. But now you're saying something to our integrity. I do not have any reason. I don't think there's any indicia to show that the decision would have been different if it had been a different requester. And so it's one thing to say you disagree with the decision. It's another thing to challenge the integrity of how we operate. That's disappointing.
I'd like to address, and you know, I understand Mr. McBlain's concerns, but I would like to make note of a couple of things. One, Act 77 is being, at this point, misquoted. It's been explained to the requester that, and if we can pull this up on the screen, Act 77 requires 48-hour compliance for a specific list of items under a subsection B. And Sean, I don't know if you can put that on the screen.
That's not the provision of the election code that's at issue, Mr. Allen. We've had this discussion. I mean, I know you want to keep attempting to direct it back.
Act 77 was exactly,
This is the provision of the election code that allows for the public view of records during normal business hours. Has been in the election code since the 1930s.
okay,
This is
I will
not
get to that,
not the
Mr.
Act
McBlain.
77 provision.
Mr. McBlain, I promise.
Well, no, Madam Chair, I'm not going to just allow this to
Can you
continue.
respond after he finishes his comments? If you disagree, you'll give.
This is the first
opportunity.
item. So the envelopes under Act 77 are clearly under Section A. The 48-hour requirement, if you scroll down, is in Section C, and it refers to all the items in Section B. That's the first thing. The second item And if you can pull up the document related to what an authorized representative may do during the canvass. And we're in the canvass. Is that one representative of each candidate at a time may observe the opening of the envelopes, which did happen, may observe the counting and the recording of absentee and mail-in ballots, which did occur, may observe the determinations regarding provisional ballots, which did occur, and challenge an absentee or mail-in ballot application prior to 5 p.m. on May 12th, or it says here on the Friday prior to an election. Then it goes on to say what they may not do: engage in, attempt to intimidate or interfere. I'm not suggesting that's what happened with the pre-canvass. This, to my mind, is engaging in the canvass. Thirdly, actually, this goes directly to the whole chain of custody with regard to an election that is not yet certified. We had a matter in court as recently as yesterday with the Yaden, with the attempt to get a Yaden recount. The judge set that aside. We have a pending request I was informed of by a solicitor for a campaign in Chichester Schools, Region 2, where the two candidates are 3 votes apart. We haven't heard yet from a potential another matter. There's a Republican contest for Marcus Hook Council that's 3 votes apart. And then we have 2 ties. Darby Borough Council that is actually going to go to the drawing of lots tomorrow. And another tie with a write-in, with 2 write-in candidates that we have to, but that's less concerning because that's the tie in Darby Borough Council will determine whether or not that person is elected. I am strongly opposed to disturbing the materials. And right now, the ballot envelopes are stored with those vote by mail ballots, not 1-to-1, but they're in the same container. And fourthly, we were not selected for the risk limiting audit, but we only learned that just the other day. And part of the risk limiting audit is being able to retrieve the ballot in the order that it was scanned on election day. And we purposely keep that batch integrity. If we were to just start thumbing through for no reason at all, prior to certification, we run the risk of it. I can't imagine explaining to a candidate in a tie or a very close contest, were these materials touched by anyone else in between election day and now? Well, yes, we had someone who wanted to come in and just look. Was there any legal basis for it? Not that I can see at this point when the election has not been certified. So those are the reasons. I bristle at the notion that anything that I've just said is untrue. It is factual. These envelopes absolutely must be and will be made available after the certification and after we clear any hurdles with recounts. Absolutely. But right now in here, I respectfully disagree with the opinion that they should be made available. And I also strongly disagree with the notion that we've had staff available to do this. So they've been busy at the wharf. Laureen can go into detail, but there are several activities that go on, and they don't involve going through envelopes right now, right here. And those are the reasons I stated in emails repeatedly to you and to the candidate.
Let me just add to that. relevant.
Can I ask a question of Mr. Parks?
I did say Mr. McFlake could speak next.
So now we've established a rule that appears nowhere in the election code that's made up out of whole cloth, that the statutory duty, and this, I view the making records available to the public, especially in the atmosphere that we are in, as important a statutory duty as any of our others. So what you've just told me is you think that this statutory duty is less important than the other statutory duties that you have, and in your view, there's no good reason for it, which again speaks to the motivation that you don't believe that the motivation is pure, so therefore we're not going to do it. But anyway, we've now made up out of whole cloth a rule that says that the election code provision that says that the papers of the Board of Election are available for the public to inspect at any time during normal business hours is suspended until something is certified, which is absolutely untrue. And in fact, may be more important than ever to allow the public to view documents that are in our possession prior to the certification. And here, I respectfully disagree with Mr. Allen. These are envelopes that have been separated from the mail-in ballots. No one has asked to take them out of order. In fact, the election code specifically provides that a member of the election staff would be there to monitor to make sure the person doesn't break any sort of chain of custody, or doesn't put things out of order, or doesn't affect or write on or do anything other than observe the envelopes. I respect that the staff has been very busy. I'm sure they have during these last 2 weeks. I disagree that, amongst all of our statutory duties, there was not one person that could not have monitored a public request. I believe there are other public requests for documents where people walked in and our staff handled them. It may not have been as voluminous as this, but we've handled requests for documents over these last 2 weeks routinely. And I fail to see the difference in this one, other than perhaps what is perceived as the motivation for it.
I regret
With
even.
that, I'll stop my remarks, and I know Madam Chair was asking Mr. Parks, and I'd ask him to, point me to the provision in the election code that says that the public's right to view documents is suspended during the certification process.
Yes, section 25 PS 2648, entitled Records and Documents to be Open to Public Inspection, proviso. The records of each county board of elections, general and duplicate returns, tally papers, affidavits of voters and others, nomination petitions, certificates and papers, other petitions, appeals, witness lists, accounts, contracts, reports, and other documents and records in its custody, except the contents of ballot boxes and voting machines and record of assisted voters, shall be open to the public inspection, except as herein provided, and may be inspected and copied by any qualified elector of the county during ordinary business hours at any time when they are not necessarily being used by the board or its employees having duties to perform thereto, provided, however, that such public inspection thereof shall only be in the presence of a member or authorized employee of the county board, and shall be subject to proper regulation for safekeeping of the records and documents, and subject to the further provisions of this act, and provided further that general and duplicate returns, tally papers, affidavits of voters and others, and all other papers required to be returned by the election officers to the county board sealed shall be open to public inspection only after the county board shall, in the course of the computation and canvassing of the returns, have broken such seals and finished for the time use of said papers in connection with the computation and canvassing. I think that the provisos speak for themselves in that section.
Respectfully, I disagree, because these are outside ballot envelopes that are not being touched in any way by our employees or necessary for any of the ongoing canvass. The use of these envelopes were finished the day after the election when we finished opening the envelopes and stored them away. And Mr. Allen, you're shaking your head, but can
There-
you tell me, have we taken out these ballot envelopes since they've been stored the day after the election?
Per
Anybody touch
our
them?
conversation, no, but going back to,
But the fact that we haven't.
But-
doesn't mean
but
we
going
don't-
back
might
to
not
the-
need to.
going-
Mr.
going
Allen,
back to
explain
the-
to them why.
going
they-
back to the question of the potential recounts, again, as recently as yesterday, received a solicitor. No. No, they can request a recount of the board and we can perform it. And I think we have an obligation to, when there's a contest as close as 3 votes, to also reinforce the integrity of the election system. But when you get into a recount, everything can be questioned. The voter registrations, whether persons were eligible electors, any provisional ballots, any provisional materials, any materials that the judges used and returned, the ballots themselves, and in the case of vote by mail and absentee applicants, their envelopes. Were they signed? Were they dated? Were they improperly signed? Were they improperly dated? Did they use did they properly use the secrecy envelope? All of those items have to maintain their integrity. That's where I stand. And I would hope that per the law that Mr. Parks just recited, it would be clear to me, at least, that we need to maintain the integrity of these records, at least until the certification, and then they will be made available.
Mr. Allen, obviously we have the certification of the election on our agenda for action today. What is the timeline, roughly, what we can expect on the recounts and other items?
These are relatively small contests, so none of them are cover a large jurisdiction or a large. So if they're filed, we should have those completed by Monday or Tuesday if they're filed today.
Upon which time these records would be available for inspection?
Absolutely.
Right. Okay.
Mr. McBlain, I want to make sure that all your concerns are voiced. That's important.
Madam Chair, I've had unfortunately, I just believe that we are contorting ourselves to find reasons and excuses not to comply with our statutory duty. And I believe it's motivated by either who the requester is or what the perceived motivation is.
Right, the
And that's the
term,
last I'll comment on.
okay, and the term motivation is interesting, right? Because as I heard Mr. Allen using it, the motivation is towards completing the election, getting it right correctly under law, and not towards an individual who isn't engaged in that activity. It's not a personal motivation. Our motivation here is to complete the canvass and to certify the election.
From my perspective, as the only non-attorney at this table, I'm hearing 3 attorneys look at the same text and come up with different conclusions. And I don't see an action item before us at this time, and we are in the middle of public comment.
So should we return to
I
it?
think we should return to public comment.
Thank you.
In that case, I'd like to use the rest of my time.
You had about 53 seconds, so go ahead.
How much? Sorry.
I'll just give you a minute. Sean, will we just count down to 2? Or if you don't need to reduce it, we could just go to 2. Okay, thank you.
I'm not an attorney, but it seems to me that the intent of the law is to allow the public to view the records prior to certification. If you're not able to view them prior to certification, how would you know that whether or not there would be cause for a challenge? If you're viewing them after certification, it would be moot. So as a non-attorney, that seems logical to me that it would be permitted before. I think that there is, I agree with Mr. McBlain that this county seems to be bending over backwards to obscure and to prevent me or authorized representatives from viewing these records. And this county is not above the law. Mr. Allen is not above the law. You do not have the authority to bypass the law. And that's all I have to say.
Sir.
My name is Paul Rumley. I live in Springfield. I was an observer on the night of the election. I was there at 8:05 when Robert posted the results of the mail-in ballots that we had thus far. There were 24,289 votes tabulated. And I spoke with a colleague of mine there, and we decided that one of the ways that we could possibly verify the authenticity of this count was if we could see the ballots. If we could count if we could count the envelopes. We didn't have any intention of touching the envelopes. Many of us have been there many times. We know how many envelopes are in a bin. All we needed to do was roughly estimate the number of envelopes in a bin, and we could have counted the bins. We could have done it in 10 minutes. We asked Jim Allen for the permission to do that, and he denied it. And he quoted some obscure, I don't remember what it was, some obscure regulation that prohibited him from allowing us to do that. I mean, you know, integrity issues, election integrity issues are rampant across the country. By the way, you're the one that brought up integrity. No one here has impugned your integrity this morning. Ms. Lukenheimer, is that your name? I believe it is. Lunkenheimer. You're the one that brought that up. But it's all over the country. And we asked for a very simple 10-minute process, and we were denied. It stinks to high heaven. And we're sick of it. It's been going on for 3 years. It's not a partisan issue. We're big boys and girls. If we lose an election, we're okay with that. What I can't abide is my vote being stolen. That's the problem. And Mr. Allen, your attempts to qualify your actions this morning are not convincing at all, not even a little bit. Thank you.
May I make a comment, Madam Chair?
Sure. I mean, I was just debating whether to comment on. I'm unfamiliar with your request, sir, but the idea that in the middle of the count, the team would stop, and I could understand Mr. Allen's response, and he doesn't pull out obscure pieces of law, although as Mr. McLean has noted, our laws, some of them have been around a very long time. But Mr. McLean, if you'd like to.
I was just going to say, when I went to the vote center that night, Mr. Allen did let me know of the interactions that he had during the day with all people, and this was one of them that this request was made. I agree with Mr. Allen and Mr. Ridley. I'm sorry. You know, I don't believe, this is where I do believe that the section of the election code that deals with public access to records does apply, that during the canvass process, the day of the election, as the envelopes are being opened, separated from the ballots, and then stored, that is when the board and its employees are handling those. So you have the right to observe what's going on, but that is not the same as participating in the process. So I respectfully do agree with Mr. Allen that on the day of the election, there is no provision, and I don't believe a court would allow observers to go and start counting or handling ballot envelopes on that day. If you were a legislator, you might write the law differently, but I believe that's what the law provides. And I agree with Mr. Allen's conclusion on that day that no one would be allowed to handle or count the ballot envelopes the day that they're being canvassed.
Thank you. Ms. Coker?
Good morning, Karis Coker, 836 Concord Road. It seems to me that a valid examination of the envelopes, perhaps not at that time, I'm not qualified to comment on that, but at least before certification should be allowed to determine whether or not it should be certified. And speaking of the certification, I have had an ongoing interest in the operations and functions of the return board. And on a completely arbitrary ground, Mr. Allen denied access. When I arrived, there was one person inside, that was Joy Schwartz, the candidate that I was a representative for, and he refused to allow both the candidate and the representative in at the same time. It's not that the room was crowded, there was no one else in there. So knowing my interest in the oath, matters of the oath, Joy stepped out and Mr. Allen permitted me to step in for the administration of the oath to the return board. Now, the state law still requires that the return board sign their report. The last two elections, this board has only had a oral report. It's hard to sign an oral report. And this board should get in line with the state requirements. You left it out of the administrative code when you changed it earlier this year in section 68 pertaining to election law. You made some changes with regards to the return board, but the state law still requires that there be a signed report from the return board. That's all I have. Thank you.
I think we've gone through the return board. Yes, okay. Any other public comment? All right, Mr. Allen. Oh, sorry, would you like to speak, please?
Hi, Donna Cantor, Middletown Township. I'm one of the assistant solicitors for the Delco Democrats, and I just wanted to say that we keep getting better and better about handling our elections. I've been working our boiler room for the last 3 years. I guess this is my 7th cycle. It gets better every single time, and I really appreciate the work that the county has done, that you're doing to make sure everyone has the opportunity to vote. I also want to say that if you follow the procedures, you can participate in the canvasses. You can participate in the opening of provisional ballots. You can challenge the ballots. We had a representative for every day of the provisional ballots that they were opened and reviewed. We challenged 6 and then we withdrew our challenges, but we were the only people there. There was no other representative from any other party or any other candidate at that process. And we sat at the desk for about 8 hours, maybe 10 because I left before we finished. But again, the process works, you follow the rules and you do what you need to do. And I thank you for doing it correctly.
Thank you.
I just want to thank Ms. Cantor for your comments on the improvements in our processes. It's something I've observed. One of the reasons I got appointed in this role was because I was very much a critic from the outside of like, hey, we need to get better. We need to get better. So they said, hey, why don't you get on the board and help us get better? And what I've observed in the past couple of cycles is this team getting, this cycle, for example, the paychecks are going to be going out to our poll workers faster than they've ever gone out, at least in quite a while. And that's been very much appreciated. I think the training has gotten so much better. And I know that we have other challenges that we're going to address, we're going to turn our attention to next. And our goal is to improve the processes. So anytime someone recognizes that, I just want to thank you for recognizing it.
Thank you, sir.
Michael Straw, 499 West Jefferson Street, Media. I'm actually going to disagree with one of the comments that was just made right here about the provisional count. As somebody who wanted to attend the provisional count this year, I emailed Mr. Parks and I thank him very much for, and Mr. Allen, and I thank them very much for getting me the information. But I have to say, I really wish I would have been able to know about the provisional count earlier. And I get it. Both political parties might have an idea of the calendar ahead of time, but in terms of the public, I don't think I saw anything on the Delaware County Election Bureau website knowing when the provisional count was occurring. And so I would have, if I had known well ahead of time that it was going to be either on this date, or at some point, I would have gladly asked either my county party, or I would have asked one of the campaigns in media or in the county to allow me to represent them at the provisional count. But I really didn't have that opportunity because by the time that I learned about the provisional count occurring the next day in the morning, I wasn't able to get the representation. I had a watcher certificate, but I understand that you have to have another form of authorization. Totally understandable because I've been at provisional counts before. And so essentially, in terms of getting better, my one request would be to include essentially either the estimated dates or the exact date eventually once it's happening of the provisional count for the challenges. I think because I, at the very least, would have been there if I had known earlier, and I think other individuals would have been there as well. So I want to let people know that. Thank you.
Mr. Straw, I want to thank you first for being a very intellectually keen and close watcher of elections. You're a frequent flyer in terms of visiting our offices.
Yes, I am. Do I get miles for that?
And we'll make a point of adding you to the party leaders list. I just want to assure you and other members of the public that Lorene Hagan did post all the legal notices, including the one related to provisional ballots and when they would be processed, and that we did post it to the website. And I was a stickler with both you and, quite honestly, with the Democratic Party, where they had applied to be authorized representatives at the wharf, and they only listed the wharf. I made them apply again because if I'm going to, I'm being a stickler about the rules because I've been reminded so many times about the rules and following the rules. So I'm trying to play it as straight as possible.
And I thank you for that. I'm just saying that in terms of viewing it on the website, I could not find it prior to the election, and it's nothing against Lorraine or anyone
No,
here.
I didn't take it that way. I want to make sure
Yeah,
that I'm
and
adding
we're
you
all
to the
about
list.
constant improvement, and I appreciate that you're trying to be constructive and helpful. And I think that you've raised a good point that when we have in our meeting before an election, we may not be able to say the exact time frame. So
Right.
many things can happen, but to the extent that it's helpful to give a little bit of a longer roadmap as to when generally provisional ballot counts might happen, I appreciate the suggestion.
The one thing I would say is, on the front page where you post the dates for specific events for the election board or the bureau, that might be a good place.
It's hard to post events that are uncertain.
future,
That's
of
the
course.
problem. But to the extent that we have a meeting and we could discuss it and say, the goal would be to, obviously everything has an end date that it has to be done by and other things. We could do that. Yeah.
Line or
Yeah.
a window of time we could post and, with a note at the bottom, interest, for more details, please contact.
Yeah.
It sounds like a web design issue could probably address much of that concern.
But thank you for offering constructive feedback. We
Thank you.
appreciate it. Any other public comments? All right, Mr. Allen.
Well, been in this business now for 17 years. Prior to that, a couple dozen as a voter, observer, participant in the whole election system. But in the election administration, this is my 17th year. And quite honestly, the staff here is just an amazing source of pride and performance and dedication to the voters of Delaware County. We had several major improvements to various, what I call the little things. Coach baseball for a lot of time, many, many years. And it's making adjustments to the little things that make a difference between safe and out and fair and foul and strike and ball. So I want to thank you all for your dedication, whether it was the drop boxes, whether it was the drop-offs on election night, whether it was getting the returns faster than ever before with more support from IT, whether it was having a roadmap at the wharf and doing a little bit of which we invited. There's a watchdog organization to come and observe us run through the paces on the ballot envelope cutting equipment the Saturday before. so that we had more people who were ready, because if you only do this twice a year, you know, being under the stressful, doing it only, you know, operating that equipment the first time on election day morning is going to set you back. The poll worker training was better than ever before. I want to congratulate in particular our new poll worker coordinator, full-time, that I've always believed needed to be added to the staff, Pam Larison. Our work with the controller's office through Pam and with board member Alberts paid dividends. We worked to make sure that we shared the database better. And the end of the story is that paychecks, has been referenced before, are going out faster than ever before. So I want to thank particularly Controller Joanne Phillips, Jeff Powers, and Gianna Martin, and the entire team at the Controller's office for looking objectively at this, rolling up their sleeves, and then putting their shoulder to the wheel in a cycle that includes a holiday. Next, I want.
That's great news, Jim. Mr. Allen, sorry, I just have to say, that's such great news. Because with a couple of years ago, before you started, that was a major issue. The length of time it took was very disappointing to poll workers who work such hard days, long days. And so thank you, everybody involved in that effort. That's just wonderful news.
So to continue to name individuals, Jackie Dunn at the warehouse, Crystal Winterbottom, who can't be here today due to a personal commitment from voter registration, Laureen Hagan at the Bureau, Amanda Wallace at the Bureau, Jim Warner at the Wharf in the Voter Service Center, and Karen Brooks, who worked out more effective outreach to voters who needed to verify ID, and voters who had legal flaws with missing signatures or dates, a system called Notice and Cure. Tim Boyd and Inder Baines of Emergency Services, the various members of the Park Police team, Christine Keck in personnel, Chief Michelle Conti and Captain Rick Bailey in the Sheriff's Department, John Becht in Information Technology, and so many others. And if I left anyone out, I apologize. But we had, as I mentioned, smoother pickups for judges, smoother drop-offs for judges, pre-canvassing on time so that results could report immediately after 8 p.m. All of the V drives returned by midnight and reported soon after. That has never happened before. Even under the old Danaher equipment, they've never before had all 428 precincts. Completion of election day pre-canvassing and canvassing by 1 a.m. and a pilot program with electronic poll books in Middletown, Brookhaven, and Upper Darby. We targeted areas where we had multiple precincts voting at the same location. We wanted to stress test this under the best circumstances. When we learned that one of the locations we picked was Upper Darby High School, and 2 of the precincts there were part of the special election for the 163rd, and 2 were not, we thought about, well, maybe that's too much of a stress test, but I pushed it ahead anyway, and it worked out great. And the voters there could be served at any one of those 4 check-in stations and then directed to the right corner of that gymnasium to cast their ballot. And it worked out brilliantly. We have feedback from poll workers who could not be here, but Gail Reuter, I would recommend the board that they vote on these poll books. Susan Baraldi, besides the speed of checking in the voters, the electronic poll book allowed us to look up information on voters that previously had to be done online or by calling someone in media. For example, one voter gave her initials only, and her name popped up, but said she was in the wrong location. The machine included a small printer, which printed out the correct location for her. So we didn't have to make a phone call. We didn't have to scramble, roll around to find a piece of paper, write it down where she needed to go. The electronic poll books did it for us. Matthew Stone, in our precinct, the most interesting part of the experience, in my opinion, was who handled the check-in procedure. We have a very knowledgeable senior poll worker in our precinct who is very adverse to technology. She does not use email and she does not have a cell phone. You get the picture. I thought for sure she would not go near an electronic poll book with a 10-foot pole. And to my surprise, I reviewed the check-in process with her before polls open, and she ended up operating the electronic poll book for the majority of the day. I loved it. Lastly, the return board met and performed 4 key tasks. The first 2 are relatively straightforward. They're sworn in, and they need to confirm that there were no precincts with more ballots cast than there were voters. We had absolutely 0 in that. Then the 2 tasks that are heavier lists involve an audit of how many ballots were supplied, how many ballots were printed out on the touch writer, how many ballots were used and how many ballots were spoiled, and then how many ballots were supposed to be remaining and returned. And of the 428 precincts, all but 1 was perfectly reconciled within the human error of Mr. McBlain and I have discussed this. Most of them were right on. A few were 1 or 2 off, and 1 was 5 off. This 1 in particular, we examined very closely because we only got back the shrink wrap packs of 50 ballots. However, in looking at the various backup systems that we have, the paper poll books, the numbered list, the tapes from the machine, and even asking the wharf to go ahead and open up that ballot box to see if there was any kind of discrepancy. It was Upper Darby 7-2, so it's not one of the items that is in a close contest, but it was clear that there were only about 40 ballots cast there. Those ballots that we did not get back and we're still going to try to track down could not have been cast in any other precinct, on any other scanner, in any other process, such as vote by mail or provisional. But the point is you want to get them back and you want to account for each and every one of them. With that, I'd like to yield a little bit of my time to Mary Jo to come up and talk about the return board work.
Good morning.
Morning.
On the first day of our return, the return board was sworn in. We assigned everybody to the districts that they would be working in. The following Monday, we compared. There are 8 tabulating teams. Each team is made up by a Republican and a Democrat. At all times, it's always, one of each party are there. We went through, compared all the records as Jim was explaining, and everything worked out well.
Thank you so much for your service. I don't know how many years of service in total we can add up for you, but we really greatly appreciate it. And the return board is hard work. Just a quick question. 2 questions. Did you see any indication of voter fraud?
I did not.
And would you recommend that this election be certified?
I do.
Any other questions for Ms. Wolf? Thank you so much for your service and thank you for coming today.
No problem.
The last and most challenging task that the return board performed was the 2% audit, where we have to do 2% or 2,000 ballots, whichever or fewer. That was completed. That is a particularly challenging task in this, even though it's a smaller election, you're still going through 2,000 ballots, but there are far more contests on the ballots. And there you have vote for 3, vote for 4, vote for 5 situations on that ballot. And it really takes a lot of focus going through one at a time. And several times they got everything right on a given precinct. It all matched up with the scanners, but one contest was off 1 or 2 votes and they'd have to go back and back until they figured out which item, which mark they were miscounting. So that's a very significant challenge. I would like to just in closing address, there was a remark that there needs to be a written report. The code is very specific. When a written report is needed is when there's a detection of gross error or fraud that requires a referral to the district attorney's office. That is when a written report is required. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Allen? No. Thank you. All right, then we move to the next item on our agenda, which is the certification itself. Mr. Allen, will you be making that presentation?
I would ask that Laureen Hagan please come to the podium.
We won't ask how many years of service you've also given because it's so many.
Thank you.
Good
We'll
morning.
just say a lot. Thank you. And we have certification. There's a series of reports that make up the complete certification for this election. Before me, I have prepared the state required ballot certification for the county or statewide offices, including any write-ins that had to be submitted to the state. We have the full election system report cumulatively showing all of the results and officially referring to them as the official and final count at this time. And then finally also the certification of computation of election results, which is similar to that of the first signing, which we did last week. Now that that we're certifying, we have to do the final certification. So we have those reports to show the votes. And the other matter, and I'm not sure if I'm jumping ahead, so advise if I am, is the write-in. We do have some write-ins that are successful on their own in one variation, others that needed to accumulate and did, or accumulated and received even more votes. So I do have that report as well. And notices will go out, if not this afternoon, tomorrow, to all the individuals that had write-ins that we verified are in the district where they lived and are registered voters, so therefore meet the qualifications on the first review. We'll send out the documentation. They must submit statement of financial interests, candidate affidavit, and if necessary, the campaign finance information.
Thank you. It came up earlier and I want to just jump in and make sure we discuss it fully so there's full transparency as to what's going to happen. I understand there are two tie elections. Could you just would you be able to report on that fact or confirm that fact for the record?
Yes, the tie votes are in Darby Borough, and in that is the one where it's a tie for second and third, or second place, I'm sorry, and so there's one person who's already secured first position, and then there's just a tie for the second. So one would be the successful and one would unfortunately be not successful. And then there's another write-in, or I'm sorry, tie vote in, I believe it's in Chester Heights, that would just determine their placement. They both will move forward to November, but it'll be who was the highest vote, therefore moving forward. But since it's a tie, we can't do that numerically. We need a tie to say who is the first vote.
And so that's why Mr. Allen was saying, I believe that that one gave him less concern because both moved forward. I believe that you may have the most experience with how to handle ties. Would you be able to discuss the process for him?
We've had a couple over the years. And so what we'll do is we'll contact the people involved, the two candidates. So we'll let the two parties know. And there'll be a casting of lots where they'll come forward. Whoever draws the lowest number. So therefore, on a scale from 1 to 16, if they draw the 1, they would be the successful, and 16 would be the least successful. But it would depend on how many people are involved. But in the one, it just is the two people. So.
And there is a deadline, a date certain that needs to happen.
Correct. Yes, that has to happen by tomorrow under the statute.
Okay. And then and this may be for the solicitors to confirm, but just so that everybody understands the timing of it, because we're here to certify, and yet there are two ties that will have the casting of lots tomorrow. Mr. Solicitor has confirmed, but I'm hoping that there's something he could say on the record about why that timing is nonetheless appropriate to certify today.
It's entirely appropriate. In fact, the statutory scheme contemplates that you could certify the results and would certify the results as a tie. And then the casting of lots is simply the mechanism in the code to break that tie and determine who is either the ballot placement, as Ms. Hagan mentioned, or the person who's going to proceed on from the primary as the nominated candidate. So the certification process is really designating what the actual numerical results were. And then from there, it's sort of there are a series of administrative acts, including how to break a tie by the casting of lots.
Thank you. And then, Ms. Hagan, so there's multiple certifications that you mentioned, including to the state, there's the special elections, there's the write-in accumulation that results in certification of elections. Would you recommend, upon your years of experience in your work on this election, that that each of those certifications be committed to signed by this board?
Yes, I do. Everything is in order. Due care was given to review the items, and definitely feel that those numbers and those information can move forward to certification to be submitted to the state and recorded as part of the county results.
Thank you. Mr. McBlain, do you have any questions?
A couple questions regarding the write-in petitions to accumulate. So just procedurally, from what the information sent to me by Mr. Allen, I believe there were 15 petitions to accumulate that were submitted to the board. Are we voting to approve those petitions as part of the certification process?
It would be, go ahead.
Mr. Parks might be able to, I think you referenced in a email about this topic that there needs to be a separate vote on the write-ins.
Well, what I see in the code is a directive to certify, these are, write-ins are called in the election code irregular ballots. That's the language they use in the code. And it says that with respect to irregular ballots, as I mentioned in the email I sent to the board yesterday, it said that they're to be certified as they appear. In other words, I take that to mean that if somebody writes in J.M. Parks and someone else writes in J. Manley Parks and someone else writes in James M. Parks, you would have to certify it as there's one vote for this version of the name, one vote for that version of the name, and one vote for the third version of the name. And then following certification, my understanding is that the board could entertain a motion to then have those results compiled to all be recognized as a vote for the same human being. So I think that that's technically the process. I'm not sure in my prior experience before the board, before I became solicitor, that whether that was observed or not. I was involved in one petition to accumulate, but I don't recall the sequencing of it. But I think that that's what the code requires from a sequencing perspective, is the certification of the results as written, and then the accumulation petition considered at that point, and then the award of the certificate to the person who's determined to be, the prevailing person. I see that as an administrative act that the board clerk could accomplish.
I mean, I don't quarrel with your analysis. So therefore, there would be a vote on the certification and a vote to approve the 15 petitions.
They don't all meet qualifications.
I'm sorry?
Ms. Hagan is reminding us that not all of them meet qualifications. Most of them do. That's all.
Yes, please, of course.
So while Ms. Hagan is handing those out, I will clarify or confirm, my understanding is that there should be two votes, a vote to certify the results as written, contemplated by the statute, and then a vote or however many votes are appropriate on either a group of the petitions to accumulate or each individually, or however the motions are made, but a second series of votes or vote on that question.
So just again, this is similar to the earlier question about the timing with the casting of lots. So then we would certify as the votes are regular, and then whatever the results are of the accumulation, we'll decide on the petitions whether or not to vote for some. It sounds like there's a few that Ms. Hagan would not recommend be accumulated. And then administratively, just as our office would submit the winner of the casting of lots, they would also submit any changes to the results that are a result of the accumulation.
Yeah, I don't think there are actually changes to the results. I think the accumulation simply recognizes that a vote for J.M. Parks and a vote for J. Manley Parks are a vote for the same person in terms of determining who the winner of the contest is. So I don't think that there's any change to the numbers. When you grant the petition to accumulate, you're saying that those votes, which you've already certified, those are the results of the election, and one vote for this version of the name, one vote for the next version of the name, be added together.
So Ms. Hagan, the votes with irregular names that have been determined to be representative of the same person by the board, by our bureau, are going to be in the numbers that we certified, or are they going to be post?
What I've identified is a list of everybody who either put forward accumulation petition and all the qualifications were approved on those votes. And there are some cases where the petition to accumulate was not valid. And then there were others where, looking at the election results, in one variation, the person had enough to meet the qualifications. And again, upon review, saw that they were a registered voter, they lived in the district for the office, and therefore that one variation met the standard to move forward. So there's, I guess, 3 different buckets of information. One is those people who accumulated and those who were approved or have a valid accumulation, and the several that did not have a valid accumulation. And I can go over that with you if you want me to start going into detail. I don't know.
Is it fair to say that the 8 that are highlighted in, I guess that's a shade of yellow, we'll call it canary, those folks are the ones we would not be, that you would not recommend for approval, and everyone else, the first item here, there's a writing count for a person who has 12 votes. Those are 12 votes they received in that name. And then further down here on line 4, we have a person who has 146 votes, and you have a recommendation of cumulate, and then cumulate number 269. So if you don't write cumulate with that second number, it's not, we're not cumulating, we're simply just verifying that these are these votes for these people.
Right.
And so all of these people we'd be voting to approve.
Correct. In the item that says, the column that says accumulate, yes, if it says yes, they did file a petition to accumulate. And then the accumulated number is what in their petition they identify as the count that they wanted accumulated. And there are 2 people that had filed accumulation, or 3 people that do not meet the standard for that.
And the rest of the folks, we just simply don't need to accumulate because they received enough votes in an
Correct.
easily identifiable version of their name.
That is correct.
I just, sorry, this may be, just to make clear, the number that the certification that we'll be doing for these elections where the yeses are met, will it include the accumulation? Or does it wait for us, we have to vote for the accumulation and then it includes it?
That would be my understanding, yes.
But I heard Mr. Park say it slightly differently, so I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. Is procedurally, we'll certify the regular ballots. We will address the accumulation issues, and categorically, you have a couple of issues, as you said, there will be 3 parts. And then when you submit the results, they will include, if we vote for accumulation, the accumulated numbers.
Right, because there are people who did not have one variation that met the standard, but when they accumulated, they do meet the standard. So acknowledging the accumulation petition, I think, is vital to complete the circle, not just their votes spoke for themselves, because in 1 or if not 2 instances, they did not. They had to accumulate to meet the standard.
Does that get,
So I'm a little
you and I
bit-
think we're having the same puzzle, so look, so.
I believe that the board, and I like just many moons ago, I litigated this issue up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, that the board has the authority to accumulate the votes before somebody goes to court. That particular situation, somebody skipped the board, went to court, we argued over that. So here I would, so there's a number of petitions to accumulate that you're recommending that we do approve, and then there's a number of petitions to accumulate that you're recommending we not approve
Correct.
for whatever the reason might be. And the ones that are highlighted in the yellow or canary are the ones that you're recommending we not approve.
Correct. They did not meet the standard. Yes.
And the other ones are in the body of in the body of the other irregular ballots where petitions accumulate were not necessary.
Correct.
Okay. And then if I could ask just another.
I want to ask about the Chester County supervision too, but
The 12 p.m. deadline, and I did, Mr. Allen had sent to me a spreadsheet, I guess, with those 15, and there were 3 that were submitted after the deadline. Are we counting those, or are we rejecting those as submitted after the deadline?
If they qualified otherwise, we wanted to make sure that we were inclusive. And I mentioned that at the provisional meeting that even though we had set 12:30, we would accept them all the way until close of business on on that day.
All right, so that's not a statutory deadline or anything that.
No, it was just an administrative one, really, that we've always imposed some kind of cutoff so that we're not hit with requests to accumulate at this meeting or the night before this meeting.
But there's some, you decided on some flexibility for people who may have gotten caught in traffic.
The
right?
original deadline, I set at 12:30, and then we went ahead and accepted any that were received by close of business.
Mr. Broom, but I think Mr. Alberts may want to ask a question about the Chester County supervision, and I'd like to hear how he characterizes the color. So could I let him?
Well, I mean, I'm not Mr. Crayola, but it is a beautiful shade of pale blue, maybe robin's egg.
I'll go with that.
I'm just curious, the note here is for under Chester County supervision, and this is the Unionville Chadds Ford School District. For those that don't know, Chadds Ford is formerly Birmingham Township that was split between Delaware and Chester, and the school district sort of is a legacy of that, maybe, I don't know, but I do know that it is a school district that straddles county lines. So how does their role, you say under Chester County supervision, do we have mutual jurisdiction? Is that primarily their jurisdiction? And what is our role then if it's primarily their jurisdiction?
We count the votes that are cast by Delaware County voters in Delaware County precincts. But they are the ones who are going to certify those results. So we've already reported this accumulation to my counterpart in Chester County long ago to make sure that, we got our job done so that they could do ours. So I would, just for the sake of good order, recommend that we certify this or as part of our certification vote, include that we accumulated these votes, but we're not declaring her the winner.
Understood. Thank you.
Is that the part 3 that you wanted to make sure we carved out? Or there's those that properly accumulate, those with issues, and is that the third one, is that we are only accumulating but not ultimately certifying?
Correct, yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McLean, did you have additional?
That's all I had on the write-ins, irregular ballots.
If you have a particular matter here that you have an interest in?
I do.
Okay, please present.
My name is Francis Catania. My identification number is 41733. First, a question. Would you tell us what the recommendations are? You're talking about canary shading and blue shading and things like
Yes,
that.
we'll go through it. That's fair.
Can we first establish, though, just for the record, your interest in this?
Do I have to reveal that? Is that a requirement here? My interest is in the write-in process.
Are you representing a particular candidate?
Yes.
And you're,
Why?
well, because he's following the proper procedure, right?
Yeah.
Public comment has ended.
Nothing on the agenda about the conversation you just had. Nothing. Where does it say write-in anywhere?
That is part of the process for the certification.
Where does
Okay.
it say that on the agenda?
I'm not allowing you to be heard, Mr. Catania. I think he was
I have to respond to that question.
to come speak publicly. First of all, you said your name. Many people are familiar with you, but you haven't said your residence, and public comment has ended.
Second ward, third precinct that I voted in.
And then it was appropriate that he confirm, as I asked you as well, whether you had a particular interest in this part of the process.
I have both the
And is,
current and a specific issue.
okay, and the specific issue,
That I reveal it. That's all that I'm.
you have indicated that you represent a candidate that has an interest in this certificate.
More than one.
Okay. I don't want to fight about this. I'm satisfied that given that you represent an interest in this in particular.
I also have a general interest in.
Well, but that general interest should be presented at public comment. So
One agenda.
the public comment,
The purpose of public comment at the beginning of the meeting on Sunshine Act is to allow people to comment on agenda items. Then Sunshine Act gives me the right to ask questions or make comment about an item for the proposal. I'm suggesting that we can cut through all of this by just indicating what the results are. What are the recommendations?
we absolutely need to go through that. So I mean, that's why we were just going through the process. I mean, we were going to go through the vote. And I do think it's fair to say that you can't see it. And while you didn't appreciate the comments on the colors, apparently, we will go through the elections. That's fair. But that's why Mr. Alberts, for example, when talking about the blue one, was very specific as to which election we were talking about. So let us have our process and continue. If you think that it is unclear for the public record, that is not our intention. We will clarify. Thank you. Okay. Any other, you said that you're satisfied? I do think we need to go very orderly through the certifications. So first, but go ahead if you have something before that, because we're going to get to, this is, as I think we've all agreed, is the accumulation issue comes after the certification. And there's several certifications that we need to vote on. Is that correct, Ms. Hagan?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So.
But you can speak at any time. Mr. McLean, if you would like to talk about that still, we're taking questions from Ms. Hagan. Please go ahead.
So setting aside for a second, as I understand, we're going to vote on the accumulations following the vote on the certification.
Correct. Are we all, Mr. Solicitor, that is the process that we've been recommended.
So the question that we have right now is just a presentation. I know we haven't had a motion yet, but I do wish to raise an issue regarding certification or suggest, or perhaps it would be more appropriate to do it in discussion following the a motion to approve the certification, as I'm sort of just thinking out loud.
I think that's probably the correct procedure from Robert's rules, is to have a motion on the table for that discussion.
In that case, I'm happy to make the motion if it's appropriate this time, just to have it on the table.
Absolutely, I can second that.
And as would I. So with that, if you're entertaining discussion.
We are entertaining discussion, please.
Motion. When we arrived last week for the hearing on the provisional ballots, we were met with an issue. It was new to me that day, about 6 provisional ballots that were cast by voters who had applied and voted mail-in ballots, but there was some defect in those ballots that caused their votes not to be counted. And the voters were notified of what they had to do in terms of asking for another ballot, either in person here in media or calling. And the voters did not do either of those things apparently. And then, but the voters did come and vote provisionally at their polling place on election day. And the under Pennsylvania Commonwealth Court ruling, the recommendation, or what we did, was not count those 6 provisional ballots per the ruling of the court, or the recommendation of the court. Subsequent to that, and there were attorneys present from the American Civil Liberties Union advocating on behalf of those 6 voters, and subsequently they filed a statutory appeal of that. I did have a chance to take a look and read the appeal, and in some respects, you know, what gets counted or where, you know, the argument around the fringes since Act 77 was passed have been sort of a game by both the left and the right to fight over what they perceive as an advantage for their voter bases. So here we have 6 provisional ballots that were not counted. And now I believe the intent of the ACLU's lawsuit is to attempt to change the law in Pennsylvania, as it appears to be a coordinated effort to do that. So, you know, this will cost Delaware County tens of thousands of dollars in attorney's fees if they drag us up through the Court of Common Pleas, through Commonwealth Court, to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court to try to achieve whatever goal it is that they may have for an issue that really is not relevant to the outcome of any election here in Delaware County. So based upon that, based upon what we did as a board last November on this similar issue, I would move to amend the results to include the 6 provisional ballots and to count those 6 provisional ballots that were at issue as I've described.
We can either vote on the motion and then have continued. I'd rather have continued discussion first, I think. So I understand your motion and what you're saying. And it's an interesting, I've been thinking about, because in the context of sort of settling a matter, right? You could settle a legal matter in certain ways. But what happened here last time, well, both times, let's go to the original election, the one that we voted in favor of enfranchising the voters and counting the provisional ballots. That vote was taken with direct evidence presented to us by individuals standing to present that evidence. And I believe voters were in attendance. I don't know if all of the voters were in attendance, but voters were in attendance to validate the evidence presented to them personally. And so there was a standing issue as well as evidence that supported a vote in that case in favor of a different provision or a different decision of the law that sort of leans towards the voter when there's evidence that favors counting their vote. In this election, we neither had an individual standing to present that evidence, I don't believe, and Mr. Solicitor, if I get anything wrong, please correct me, but they didn't have standing to make the motion, and then they didn't present direct evidence in any way. Now, I understand, and I've read their pleadings as well, and I read it in preparation for this meeting, the possibility that this might come up. And it's disappointing because it's very possible that the evidence that they present in the court papers may have resulted in a different vote by this board, and maybe even a unanimous vote in a different direction. But under the circumstances, I don't think we have a situation where someone withstanding has presented to us an issue with evidence in favor of deciding on a vote for one sort of rule of law as opposed to the court decision that all of us, including you, noted to the ACLU appears to bind us. So under those circumstances, I have concerns, even though, again, I think you know that this puts certainly someone like me in a very difficult position because I want to favor the voter in all circumstances, but I don't know that it's been properly presented, even as the context and the way you've said it, which is it would moot the legal case and is therefore, I guess, at some level, a settlement. So those are my concerns. Mr. Albert, did you have any?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I would love nothing more than to see these votes be counted. I said that on the record at the provisional meeting. I think the Commonwealth Court ruling is disgraceful and an affront to democracy. And so all things being equal, if there was something before us to vote on last time, like you say, it might well have been a unanimous vote in the direction that Mr. McBlain is thrusting today. But, I do listen to the advice of the solicitor, and I worry about the other 66 counties in Pennsylvania and subsequent elections, and the fact that this is a very unsettled question that we go back and forth and around on. And quite frankly, I'd rather not ask ourselves and our staff to violate what is the current court ruling. And if the ACLU wants to go to court to try to change the law, that is their right. That is the way our system is. And if that prevails, I think that would have a much clearer effect than 6 voters in one particular election that doesn't affect the outcome one way or the other. I think I would prefer to stay our course as it is. And if other folks can get us better clarity through the court system, I think everyone would appreciate more clarity on this, because right now, from what I've read and what I've observed in my discussions with folks, different counties are taking different approaches to this. And, that's not we're about to head into a general election where people will actually be voting on who actually gets to hold public office. Next year, we'll have presidential elections, with elections that are with much higher stakes. I'd rather have this law be settled before we get into those contests. And I don't think us, as much as it pains me, I don't think us approving these 6 votes is going to get us there, and it will put us in a situation we are acting against the advice of our solicitor and against the whatever my opinion of the ruling, it is a court ruling. So that's my thoughts on it.
I'm not asking you, Mr. Parks, to weigh in, but if you had anything you wanted to say, I do want to give you the opportunity, given the legal issues.
Yeah, I just would also note, there is a somewhat picayune and obscure potential consequence of the board, should the board want to change its position and count these 6 votes. It's potential that an argument could be made under 25 PS 3154F that is part of the computation and that restarts the 5-day clock that the statutory code conceives of for objections that would thereby prevent certification during that 5-day protective window, meaning that could arguably, you'd either take the position that it doesn't restart the clock, but then if you took that position, conceivably, somebody who wanted to challenge the board's reversal of this issue could then go to court, argue it did restart the 5-day clock, argue that the certification that the board voted on was inappropriate in light of the fact that it was inside this arguable 5-day safety period. So I'm not saying that that's what the statute says or means, but I'm saying that it's very possible that somebody could argue that, and that could get, if the interest there is in avoiding taxpayer expense for legal fees, we could go out of the frying pan and into the fire with a whole nother set of litigation over whether that 5-day clock restarted and whether the certification happened within the 5-day protective period, et cetera, et cetera. Not to mention that the 5-day period would, if restarted, would take us out beyond the statutory deadline for certification. So there are layers and layers of potential consequences, ripples in the pond of this conceivably, just something to be aware of.
That quite a few people have an interest in perhaps delaying the certification of an election that has statewide consequences.
Anything else, Mr. McBlain? The motion has not been seconded.
I'm not looking to delay the certification.
Oh, I'm not saying, I'm just saying it's reasonable to assume someone in the state does.
I don't think, yeah, that's the issue here.
Delay the certification, but I pose the inquiry. What happens if the Court of Common Pleas grants the statutory appeal? Does that, under the same logic, render our decision on certification invalid? And
yeah, it does not, because the code specifically contemplates that court orders that adjust the count are exceptions. They're specific, and that's part of the reason I have some concerns about this board doing it, because there are specific provisions in the code for what happens if a court or a recount results in a different result. It doesn't have a situation, it doesn't contemplate that the board would change its mind on a tabulation issue.
well, why can't the board change its mind after seeing the statutory appeal and saying we stipulate to it?
I'm not saying the board can't. I'm just saying that the code section does specifically and expressly contemplate an adjustment to the tabulation by virtue of a court order or by virtue of the result of a recount, but it's silent as to a scenario where the board would change its mind and adjust the numbers and what the effect is on the calendar that as a result of that. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, the motion has, I have not seconded that motion. Have you?
The motion to.
The motion to vote to potentially to overturn. I think you moved to
amend.
To amend.
The provisional ballot vote from last week.
To include provisional ballots.
Okay.
I have not seconded it either.
Okay.
Remind, the last meeting, it was called a travesty of justice.
I think he reaffirmed that today. He said some different words, but it was equally colorful. It is in the court's hands.
We are bound by it. So if the remedy, if the problem is created by the courts, the remedy is in the courts, not on this table.
This is a political issue that what will happen is the residents of Delaware County will end up spending tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees. And that's not a criticism of Mr. Parks at all. It's just naturally as we get dragged through what the ACLU, I guess, perceives to be a friendly forum to start with. In order to sort of play the Act 77 game here for something that is completely irrelevant to the outcome of this election, we can just skip it and let them go fight about it somewhere else.
Well, I don't know that that's necessarily true, that we'll spend tens of thousands of dollars. I mean, our positions on the merits of the issue have been well presented. And I think we do have a role in making sure that the facts are correct. I was disappointed in parts of the ACLU's filing for, in particular, their discussion of our cure procedures, of which I'm very proud of. But that I don't want to go too far into because it will start to engage in how we direct our solicitor to represent us. All right. With that, then I just want to make sure, may we return to Ms. Hagan's certification presentation? Thank you. And Ms. Hagan, just to make sure because of all the complications around different pieces of this, if you could go through one by one and make sure Mr. Catania, as well as everybody listening, understands exactly what we are voting on, I would appreciate that. And we can do it individually.
For the write-ins.
And we're starting with the certification.
Okay. The certification of the election results. As I said, we have the state certification, election ballot certification, where we've recorded the statewide results and any write-ins, which there were no significant write-ins for statewide candidates.
Should we do it together? I think we should do it individually, just to be, so the record super clear. So that's the first one. Sorry.
Right. Then there is.
Wait, no, let's vote on each one individually. I think just
Okay.
for the record, it's very clear. Sorry. So this is the statewide certification for those statewide elections.
Yes,
And you've recommended that we vote to certify.
yes, I do.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second? You don't want to, I'll second it. I won't put you in that position. Okay. Any additional discussion on that certification? No, go ahead.
thinking, These are for the statewide candidates?
Yes, yes, it's a state certification. It goes from the Justice of Supreme Court through to the judge of the Common Pleas Court, and then asks for any write-ins. No, none were significant in those offices.
Are we going to vote on office by, or?
We should probably enumerate for the record each office that we're.
That
voting
would
on.
make it clear. I'm comfortable with that. Ms. Hagan, sorry, you've often had to read things to this board, so.
That's okay. So the first office would be the Democratic primary for Justice of the Supreme Court, vote for one. You wish me to say the candidates as well, or?
If anybody would like that to be clear, would you like her to say the
No,
resulting?
I'm not advocating. for
Just the
more
office
detail,
themselves.
Chair, I'm not trying to obscure anything either, but I mean, are we going to go through like Alden Borough Council?
No, this was the one particular certification. I was intending to have it presented as all the statewide offices that we would certify that.
Okay.
And then we would go through to the next one, which would not be the state certification. If you'd like, Ms. Hagan, I know I've interrupted you 5 times when you've tried to say the name. Would you please present the name of the second certification?
Is the certification of computation of the election results for Delaware County.
So I was suggesting that we break those out and do one vote and then one vote state and then Delaware County. We could do them together, but I just wanted to be very clear for everybody what we were voting on okay. All right, so then are you okay with that procedure, Mr.
Yep.
McLean? So then the first one is the statewide certification. All those in favor say aye. Aye. None opposed. That motion passes. The second is now, Ms. Hagan, you already said it.
The certification of computation of the election results in Delaware County.
Okay. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Any second? Okay. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. None opposed. That motion passes. Please,
Okay,
to the
and then
next.
the next item would be the write-ins. Is that what you do wish me to go through them? Okay.
Do we need to do the special? Yeah. Or would those count on, are those included on the state?
They
And
would be
the, and the
included in the
county
results for Delaware
certifications?
County.
Okay. Thank you.
So the write-in results, if we go through one by one, is the school director for Chester Upland School District. There were no candidates on the ballot. There are 2 candidates who, in one variation, received enough votes and are qualified per registration and per living in the district that would received enough votes, and that would be Beverly Harris and Lawrence Ham.
I think we can vote on your recommendations collectively, but I appreciate you speaking them specifically so that everybody knows what we're voting on. So thank you.
Okay,
Please
fine.
continue as you
Okay.
are.
We can always have a motion that amends to strike one or the other if we have a.
Correct.
Okay.
For the record, we should probably indicate where there was a petition to accumulate or not, and there was not one for either of those candidates.
The next one is school director in Southeast Delco School District for the Republican Party. And that is John P. Lafferty, and there was no variation or no petition to accumulate. His one variation was sufficient to meet that threshold. We had discussed the school director from Unionville Chadsford School District. There is a petition from Brittane Hamill, had enough in one variation, but also accumulated to receive almost double, or an additional 100 votes anyway. But again, that will be addressed specifically with the Unionville Chadsford School District and Chester County. The next one is School Director, Springfield School District, Region 9, Republican Party. Dina M. Boggs received enough in one variation. She did not file accumulation petition. Auditor in Edgemont Township, Democratic Party, in one variation, Vince DePilio, received enough votes to be considered for the write-in. Auditor in Edgemont Township, Republican Party, received enough in one variation for a Liz, also registered as Elizabeth Bezvinick, received enough without accumulation. Auditor in Middletown Township, Democratic Party, received enough. Actually, the same person received enough for that office in both Democratic and Republican variations to move forward and did not accumulate, did not need to either.
And that's Brian Gildea.
Yes, I'm sorry, thank you. Auditor in Springfield Township Democratic Party did not have enough in one variation, but did file accumulation, and that would be Thomas J. DeLuca Jr. Tax collector in Trainer Borough, Democratic Party, one variation was Victoria Orlando, and that was sufficient to move forward. No accumulation petition was filed. Mayor in Chester City, Republican Party, there was enough in one variation for Stefan Roots to be considered for that write-in. And again, I should state that they will receive information, that they have to accept the nomination. This is just identifying those who met that threshold.
Just a query, I'm sorry. How many, for a nomination petition, how many are required for a city of third class mayor? Is that just 10?
I think it's 10 everywhere, right?
I don't know, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
I believe it is, but I would say that I would want to check that, but my memory is that it was 10. Do you think we may have the solicitor checking that?
Could she
Okay.
continue while he checks?
Sure,
it?
sure, sure.
Thank you.
So put it right there. Controller in Chester City, Republican Party, Joy Taylor received enough under one variation, and perhaps that would be similar to the mayor if they both meet the same 10 vote threshold. Council in Collingdale Borough, Republican, Lisa Jones received enough under one variation. Council Collingdale Borough, Republican Party, Felicia Coffey received enough under one variation. Council Fallcroft, Republican, Lee Daly received enough under one variation. Council Fallcroft Borough, Republican Party, Frank Redding received enough under one variation. Council in Morton Borough, Republican Party, Beth Ann Johnson received enough under one variation. Council Parkside Borough, Democratic Party, Anna Guy received enough under one variation. Council Parkside Borough, Democratic Party, Theodore McCleary received enough under the one variation, but also filed accumulation, which more than doubled his votes for his write-in. Council Prospect Park Borough, Democratic Party, Richard Williams did have enough under one variation, but also accumulated a petition and doubled his amount, or just shy of doubling his amount to move forward. Council Rutledge Borough, Democratic Party, Andrea Juarez received enough under one variation to move forward. Council Trainer Borough, Democratic Party, Vicky Paget received enough under one variation. Commissioner Lower Chichester Township, Democratic Party, Mark Lampaw received enough under one variation, but also filed a accumulation petition to move forward and met that threshold. Commissioner Lower Chichester Township, Democratic Party, Ray Baldwin did not have enough under one variation, but did file accumulation, which brought his votes to the threshold necessary. Commissioner in Upper Chichester Township, 5th Ward, Democratic Party, Michael Gaudioso received enough under one variation. Commissioner, Marple Township, 7th Ward, Democratic Party, Mike May received enough under one variation, but also filed accumulation petition for more votes. Commissioner Radnor Township, 3rd Ward, Republican Party, Baron Gemmer received enough under one variation, but also filed accumulation petition to receive more votes. Commissioner Ridley Township, 3rd Ward, Democratic Party, Jack Praisner Received enough under one variation, but also filed accumulation petition to move his numbers higher. Commissioner, Springfield Township, First Ward, Democratic Party. Ed Kelly received enough under one variation, but also filed a petition to accumulate and increased, actually accumulated, but had the same count. Commissioner, Springfield Township, Fifth Ward, Democratic Committee. Jeff Rudolph received enough under one variation, but did a petition to accumulate and received additional votes for his variations. Commissioner, Springfield Township, Seventh Ward, Democratic Party. Megan Laciano Cortez received enough under one variation, but filed a petition to accumulate and increased the count of votes. Council, Fallcroft Barrow, Republican Party. Joseph G. Papaleo received enough under one variation, did not file a petition. The following are ones that had issues with their filings or their write-ins. School Director, Springfield Region 4, Democratic Party. Katie Reimer does not live in the district for that office. Council, Chester City, Republican. Fred Green is not found registered in that district. Council, Parkside, Republican Party. Michelle Scrobach.
I'm sorry, can I just, Mr. Green is not registered in the city of Chester?
We did not find a Fred Green registered in Chester. I can show you the Shore search if that was.
No, I
Okay.
believe you. Wasn't he a
Okay.
candidate on the ballot?
I don't believe that anyone filed any objection to his petition. All anyone filing an objection to his petition.
Council, Parkside, Republican. Michelle Scorbach. She did receive enough write-in votes, but it's the same office she was already on the ballot for with the same party. So therefore, those write-ins cannot be counted. Same situation for the following for Council, Parkside, for Sarah Haynes. She's already on the ballot for that party. Therefore, those write-ins cannot be included. Council Trainer, Democratic Party. John Gasparo could not be found registered. Commissioner, Springfield Third Ward, Thomas J. DeLuca Jr. Two issues. One was there were not enough sufficient write-in votes, even though he filed a petition to accumulate, still only took him to 2 votes. Plus, I believe he is not in that school or in that ward for the township. Council, Chester City, Republican. William Morgan. More than one person is registered in the city with that name, so we could not identify the specific candidate. Excuse me. Council, Trainer Borough, Democratic Party. Michael Carter is the same issue. There's more than one person in Trainer Borough registered with that name, so therefore we could not identify the candidate who collected those write-ins.
And in both cases where you couldn't identify, we didn't receive a petition from any person claiming to be that person?
No, we did not.
Okay.
Mr. Parks or Mr. Allen, I believe maybe both of you have come to the answer.
Sure, just to address the question that was presented, the number of signatures necessary to get on, to be nominated through the nominating petition process for public or party offices to be filled by a vote of the electors in the cities of the third class at large is 100. To the extent that that this is an office that involves some other thing other than a city of the third class at large, it would default back to the 10, which is the catch-all, all other public and party offices. And my understanding is this isn't at large. The mayor would be elected at large in the city of Chester, and I would have, I mean, if
As
your
it was
recollection is
before.
that's a city of the third class, then I would rely on that. So it sounds like 100 votes is the threshold. there.
That's consistent with the packet that Ms. Hagan put together too.
Okay, thank you for
So-
reminding me of that threshold. I'm sorry, I lost sight of that
That's
when
quite
putting
all right.
together the items yesterday.
So the petition to accumulate, if it looks like it's 74, that, that still could be granted, but that doesn't mean the person qualifies to be the elected candidate on the ballot.
Well, there wasn't a
Yeah.
petition to accumulate.
Oh, right, okay.
If there had been, there were enough variations that very well could have put the person over 100, but we did not receive a petition to accumulate from this candidate.
nor for the controller for Chester City, Joy Taylor. So
And so
there-
it's the only city with a third class in Delaware County. The rest of the, so I think it would be appropriate then to amend any motion to adopt to exclude those. Is that what we're saying?
I mean, I think they would go into the canary, right? Under the circumstances. All right. Do we need to vote separately on Union Village Heads Forward? If we are voting to, how should we break this down, Mr. Solicitor? We vote first to accumulate all those recommended to be accumulated, and not those not recommended to be accumulated. So, I mean, Ms. Hagan has read them very clearly when they've been asked for a petition for accumulation. So that's how I'm inclined to do it. But does that make sense? That would include Unionville Chats Ford because they've moved to accumulate.
I think that would be fine. I think that I agree with Director Allen that for the sake of good order, it's appropriate to entertain a motion or the petition to accumulate, even though that school district is under the direction of Chester County.
Right.
Should there be any question about the total number of votes, and because we count the votes in Delaware County districts for that, that's appropriate, I think, for this board to entertain. And I don't see any reason that's on the spreadsheet. It was just read and read into the record. I don't think that there's any reason that would have to be broken out in a motion unless somebody chose to do that just for the
Right, I
sake
thought
of
so earlier,
clarity.
but I agree. I don't know that it does need to be broken out, since we're simply voting on the petitions to accumulate. Any concerns from the other board members? Okay. Is there a motion to grant the recommended petitions to accumulate?
I'll make that motion so long as we are explicitly reflecting the Chester City mayor and controller races are in the not recommended pile as discussed.
Well, they did not petition to accumulate.
No, it's just accumulated.
I think that why don't we vote on, let's start with just those that have yes by them, those that she read as they move to accumulate and they qualify to have that accumulation granted.
So moved.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, none opposed, that motion passes. Perhaps we need to vote on those separately that have not been recommended, that we grant the accumulation request.
So one thing I would ask for clarification on, my understanding is that the different entries on the last page of the spreadsheet we're looking at that are highlighted in the light yellow, that there was no petition to accumulate for any of those. Is that correct, Ms. Hagan?
Mr. DeLuca did file a petition for, as I said, the Springfield Third Ward, but the council only took him to 2. So it was not sufficient. And also in further review, I believe he does not live in the Third Ward of Springfield.
So we would need to vote on that, though, specifically. Are there any others on that page? There are none others on that page that actually, there's no yeses by them, but Mr. DeLuca, I understand you would have put a no by him.
Michelle Scrobach and Sarah Himes also filed petitions. But again, it's the same office they were on the ballot for, same party. So therefore, those votes, you cannot accumulate into your on-ballot variations or votes.
And then Reimer, Green, Morgan, and Carter did not move to accumulate?
Correct.
And Gasparo, sorry. Okay, so then do we have a motion to deny the petitions to accumulate of Michelle Scrobach, Sarah Haynes, and Thomas J. DeLuca Jr.? Is that how we should proceed?
Yeah, I would just specify that this is the petition from Thomas J. DeLuca Jr. with respect to commissioner in the Springfield Third Ward, because there's a different petition for Thomas J. DeLuca Jr. for auditor in Springfield Township on the first page that we've already considered and voted on, just so the record's clear which one we're talking about now.
Assuming that's Mr. McBlain's intent, yes.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
None opposed, that motion passes. Now, is there back to now Mr. Alberts, the point he raises, is there any motion that needs to be made for the write-in candidates that did not petition to accumulate, but that did have write-in names that matched, appropriately matched up with their registration?
Correct.
I don't believe there's a need for the board to act on those because their variation, a single variation would be sufficient to get them on the ballot. And, you know, if there's anybody here representing such a candidate and who sees it differently, I'd be more than happy to have a conversation about it. But it seems to me that if there's a variation that is a sufficient number to put them on the ballot and no petition to accumulate, then they simply win by virtue of having enough votes, and the board doesn't need to do anything, and there's no petition to accumulate in front of the board anyway.
And they would have to accept the write-ins as well. All the candidates, even if they filed a accumulation petition, still have to accept and file the statement of financial interest in the timely fashion. And
Sure, we can't force them to take the office.
So I guess to make it perfectly clear then,
We're gonna get to these
that
two.
I would move to approve the tabulation of the irregular ballots as presented by Ms. Hagan.
With the amendment that two of them are not qualified, that was not noted
Yes,
In Chester.
in Chester.
correct. Yes, with that provision.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
None opposed, that motion passes. Does that complete the action items?
yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for, it's been a while since we've had you read a lot of names and things for a long time. Thank you, Ms. Hagan, as always, for your incredible service to this county. All right, with that, I believe we are turning to the resolutions requested by Mr. Allen.
Madam Chair, the board and I and members of the public and as a team of election managers, we've discussed various processes and made improvements over time. One of the first I remember upon landing here in 2021 was observing that we used to have 2 scanners in half of our precincts for reasons unknown to election administrators anywhere else in the country. We changed that and we got rid of that second scanner. And I'm pleased to say that that makes all of our processes from programming all the way through logic and accuracy and everything else. And then finally, delivery and collection of V drives and recovery of those materials from the precincts infinitely smoother. Likewise, since before I got here, when I was being asked about this job, the question was raised whether we could tackle once and for all some legacy issues that included what are commonly called around here micro precincts, precincts that have as few as 130 voters, precincts that have 200, 300 voters, and whether we could consolidate those for the sake of good order, which has a ripple effect across ballot styles, across training, recruitment of poll workers, across just the entire database, then especially and particularly at our warehouse, but even at the wharf and in voter registration. Montgomery County has 1.5 times the number of voters that we do. They have 600,000 voters and they have 426 precincts. We have 400,000 voters and we have more precincts than Montgomery County. Similarly, Chester has considerably fewer precincts than we do. I think they're in the neighborhood of 220. Now, someone could make the argument, and I think validly, that Chester County needs to increase the number of precincts it has because of the growth that they've had over the last decade. However, it's clear that we should strive to consolidate precincts where it's difficult not only to find polling places and recruit poll workers and everything like that, but also just to staff them adequately. At this past election, we were able to get by in precincts where we only had 3 individuals in each of the 2 precincts. But in reality, we would be better off if there were 3 people in at each of the 2 precincts voting at the same location, if we could combine that team and have 1 paper poll book, 1 set of ballots, 1 scanner, 1 check-in station. This is going to require public hearings. This is going to require notification of voters. This is going to require considerable effort during our quote-unquote downtime. But for the sake of good order, heading into 2024, this is the year that we should really rip off this Band-Aid and get this done once and for all. And I want to make it clear that what I'm asking of the board is direction to move ahead on this, but with the clear-cut plan to limit this so that we're not creating any splits. And by split, I mean we're not creating a precinct that's going to straddle or include 2 or more state representative districts, or 2 or more MDJ districts, or 2 or more state Senate districts, what have you. And also that we would, try to keep it at the maximum of 1,200. But again, when we have 2 precincts with 600, they're voting at the same location, and we're barely able to staff either one, and we're adding to the paperwork and the return board work and everything else, it makes sense to do so. Secondly, as part of this, and it's very well connected in terms of the goals we're trying to achieve, is we've had a successful pilot program of the electronic poll books. And the electronic poll books are critical to the easier and faster check-in of voters. Faster, whether it's 4 precincts voting in the same gymnasium, or at Middletown, there were 2 in one part of the township complex and another third one in the other part of the township complex, or in Brookhaven, where you have 2 separate rooms in the municipal center, and we had 2 precincts in one and 2 in the other. And Madam Chair, you observed on Election Day in Chester a setup where they did not have the electronic poll books, and there was an elderly voter who had to navigate an extremely long hallway just to get to the right place, and was being redirected between the different precincts. And if we had had the electronic poll book there, she would have been able to be directed to the correct precinct, regardless if there were 7 precincts voting in that same location. Additionally, in a presidential election, you have more infrequent voters, but you're going to have more people going to the wrong polling place based on where they lived 3 years ago, 4 years ago, the last time they voted. And these are the only way that that you can't use paper poll books the way that you can use electronic electronic poll books to direct voters to the right polling place, which was attested to by some of the poll workers who worked with these. They provide more transparency. They still produce a paper record of each one, and I would argue an additional paper record. You can, as campaigns, pull a midday report of voter history at that precinct. You can record voter history and make it available to the public within a week or so of the election. Right now, we can't do that. It requires manually scanning, looking for a signature, sometimes errantly scanning, I might add, where someone signs on the wrong line. Manually scanning each item on each page where there was a signature. And we don't get voter history on a high turnout election until weeks after we've certified. If we're interested in transparency, if we're interested in the possibility for voter ID, this is the way to go. These have the capacity to scan ID and speed up check-in even faster. Because right now, with the electronic poll book, all they have to do is type in 3 letters from the first name, 3 letters from the last name, and right away, the voter's name comes up. And what's more critical is that these electronic poll books provide the poll worker with clear and consistent instructions on how to assist and direct that voter for each voter situation. So they don't have to rely on what they did or did not recall from a class 3 weeks ago. There's a list of all the forms of ID that are acceptable and which ones need to be current, meaning their current address, and which ones are state issued, government issued. I can continue on the virtues of the electronic poll books, but I hope I've made it pretty clear that in terms of accuracy, and in terms of checking in the right Mary Jones, as opposed to accidentally checking in her daughter, and then the other person arrives and is confused. In terms of potentially being able to use voter ID, I currently disagree with the Department of State on disabling that aspect. But if people have ID and they want to use that to check in faster, why in the world not? And if it adds to the accuracy. So with those concerns in mind, I would ask the board to consider a motion. I have asked the board to consider a motion authorizing us to work on these twin goals of precinct consolidation and pursuing a request for proposal for the electronic poll books.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. I'm not going to comment on the voter ID part, but I do want to comment briefly on your recommendations. I'm very excited to be at this point. You know, when I was first put on this board in January of 2020, it was clear to everybody. It remains clear. I think Mr. Alberts is probably on this board in no small part because of his motivation to accomplish this very important task for this county as part of our constant improvement of elections, to review the precincts and their makeup and to make sure that they are right-sized for every aspect. Not efficiency is one, but certainly to make sure that the voters are able to vote effectively, fair and consistent with the law, because they have proper staffing, because it's all of the efficiencies that come with making this project are so important to us successfully allowing voters to have as much access to voting as possible. So I'm just excited to be at this point where we have the capacity. There's no doubt it's going to be a heavy lift. I think anyone who was here present during that presentation about the, it wasn't Upper Providence, it was the Radnor districting, knows how complex these issues can be. And I thank in advance our teams for the hard work that they're going to have to do. I think in the long run, this is just one of those things that will absolutely benefit all of the county in the long run, but in the short run will require a heavy lift. So I'm excited for that. I certainly am in favor of that. I know others, I'll make sure everybody has a chance if they'd like to speak to that. I'm guessing Mr. Alberts probably would. But I do think that the electronic poll book process is part of that as well, because we are trying to make our precincts work better for the voter. And I think that the Chester High School example is the epitome of how I'm not sure that we're going to be able to consolidate the precincts that are located in that hallway, but we certainly can make the process for the voter more effective. And ultimately, I have one request for clarification, but ultimately, we are not the purse strings for the electronic poll books. I do believe that the efficiencies that they create, along with a consolidation project, review and project, and maybe expansion if necessary. But when we do that, there will be some offsetting of the electronic poll book costs if we are able to get the number of precincts to the right number for our county and for our voters. But it won't be 100%. But I think that the the access to voting that will be increased by creating that flexibility. There was a 93-year-old woman who had to walk to the wrong precinct that could have easily been directed to the right precinct before taking what seemed like a very, very, very long walk for her. I would hate to think that someone like that would be discouraged from voting. Luckily, she persisted. this is something that could make that experience so much better for all of our voters. And so I support that. But just in terms of the request that you have made, is it to pursue proposals to then present to the county council? Or how is it exactly nuanced? Because we don't ultimately pay for that. So we could make a recommendation that they adopt a proposal for countywide electronic poll books, but we ultimately can't decide that happens.
There's a mid-year review of the capital improvement plan, capital improvement program. I apologize if I'm using the wrong term. And as part of that, I've been asked that if we're going to have a recommendation from the board for council to consider incorporating electronic poll books, we need to do so now. At the same time, in discussions with the board members, all three board members, we've reviewed the efficiencies and the necessity, quite honestly, for consolidating precincts where it makes sense.
Okay.
I would add to that, and to your question, in my time as solicitor for the board, I believe that the board has actually voted with respect to cost items in both ways. The board has simply adopted, considered and approved a motion to adopt certain cost items, and in other instances has voted in what was worded as a recommendation to county council. There is some, the code is relatively clear that the board can vote to incur expenses, and the county council or county commissioners of the county are obligated to essentially pay the board's bills. But I think in the interest of making sure that this board and county council are cooperative with one another, that the spirit of this is perhaps best reflected in a recommendation as opposed to a directive.
Thank you. Mr. McLean, do you have any comments or questions?
No, I'm in agreement with the proposal.
Yeah, and you are right. This is my primary motivation for accepting this appointment. I think anyone who's worked elections, certainly in Upper Darby, but I know from my own direct experience, but in other parts of the county, understands this has to be our top priority of precinct consolidation. Most of these precincts were created a very long time ago in Upper Darby. Most of them were created in the 1920s at a time where our election procedures were different, our populations were different, our voter participation was different. To allow these to go this long without any correction has caused a number of problems, which were discussed by Mr. Allen, including staffing the polls, trying to find people. I mean, trying to find 4 people to work in Upper Darby 7-6, which for several years had fewer voters than the state mandated threshold of 100. Like in an illegal precinct, finding 4 people to staff that so that 7 people can come out and vote in a primary, I think is just, it's wasteful. I think that we have a lot to improve here. What I would like to strongly urge everyone working on this project, when the proposal I'd like to see is one that is equitable throughout the county and accounts for not just where possible, not just the number of registered voters, but also where there's a judgment call to be made one way or the other, account for the average percentage turnouts we see in those precincts. Because I do think there's a difference between a 1,200 voter precinct that has an average of 80% turnout versus a 1,200 voter precinct that has an average of 25% turnout. So I'd like to account for that to the extent that it's possible and appropriate to do so.
The only other comment I have, Madam Chair, is that as we go into the process, and I'm sure this is in the plan, but before we start picking winners and losers in terms of precincts, that we have objective standards going into the process, and that those perhaps be presented to the board at some point in time, just so that at the end of the process, there inevitably will be people that agree with what we do and disagree with what we do. We can show them that this is how we started, with an objective process to take a look at, which precincts should be consolidated and which should be there, and then ultimately certainly listen to the public Because if anything, Delaware County is a very parochial place. And people will tell you why it is that we should have it there that necessarily don't show up in numbers. But I would encourage us to establish that objective standard to go into it, to start the review process.
Absolutely.
Agreed.
And so, Mr. Allen, the recommendation is to begin to pursue that, but obviously, we're going to stay close to this, and I think it will be, there will be a ton of opportunity for public discussion on as we pursue this, but starting with the standards that we're going to have recommended that we look at as we approach this issue is really important, as well as I think the presentation on the electronic poll books. I'm not inclined. I don't think this board has, at least when I've been on it, forced upon the county an expense just because we can under the code. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Am I wrong about that?
I think the board did vote to increase the pay to poll workers
Okay, in that
without
sense, without
making a
asking
recommendation,
I'm
and
gonna
that's what
stand
I
by
had
that
in
vote
mind.
then. I'll stand by that one every day. All right, but other than that, we tend to recommend, but I do think that recognizing that they have their own concerns that they need to be mindful of, including costs, I do think that this entire project, looking at the way you presented it, Mr. Allen, as a overall, let's get these precincts right, let's get them efficient, let's get them great for the voter to vote in, is the right way to go. And I do think that there will be cost effectiveness as well as other things more important to the voters' experience. So thank you. With that, should we move to authorize Mr. Allen to pursue precinct consolidations and recommending or including in that vote that he constantly keep us close so that we understand as the process unfolds how that's being approached, as well as pursue a request for proposals for the implementation of countywide electronic poll books. Is that, Mr. Allen, is that capture your intent from this bullet?
Yes.
Okay, is there a motion?
So moved enthusiastically.
Okay. All those in favor say aye. Aye. None opposed. That motion passes. All right, Mr. Allen, looking forward to hearing more from you on these issues.
Thank you. I know what I'm going to be doing this summer.
Well, I'm sure you were worried that you had nothing to do. The next meeting date, please.
We'll tentatively have a meeting the fourth Tuesday, which would be the 27th of June. That'll be on the call of the chair, unless, of course, we need to meet sooner or unless we are not needed to meet on June the 27th.
And the man who spoke about understanding timelines is no longer here, but in case he or anybody else is listening, Mr. Parks, is there anything about the casting of lots, the court cases? It seems to me that there may be reason to have to come together possibly in the future.
I believe that there is at least one legal matter that I would be looking for a board determination on as to whether to join in a legal matter that will be going forward. We've had some preliminary discussions about it, and I believe that the current status of that is that the board members expressed an interest in seeing a draft of the complaint in that matter before voting. But I think the timeline is such that that would be a matter that we would not want to necessarily push back through to July. So, I think that the June 27th date is probably fine and consistent with the timeline of that particular matter. So yes.
Great. And then we'll also then have the opportunity, whether it's June 27th specifically or not, to hear about the casting of lots. And I don't think that if the petition is filed for the recount, just to have a report back on it. I don't know if there's
Yes.
any board decision that would need to be.
I don't believe there is as to those items. But we'll see how they unfold. And if there has to be a board meeting and, nearer term because of the way the direction those things take, we can certainly do that.
Anything else from anybody? All right. Thank you very much. This meeting is adjourned.